C-21 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings today are televised and will be made available via the House of Commons website. The webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, March 11th, the committee will commence its consideration of Bill C-24, an act to amend the Employment Insurance Act, additional regular benefits, the Canada Recovery Benefits Act, restriction on eligibility, and another act in response to COVID-19. I'd like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussion with 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by questions. We're pleased to have here with us the Honourable Carla Qualtrough, the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion, Laurie McDonald, the Senior Associate Deputy Minister, Employment and Social Development and Chief Operating Officer for Service Canada, and Graham Flack, Deputy Minister, Employment and Social Development Canada. And I understand that they're in the process of logging in, so although I've welcomed them, there might be a short delay before they are actually with us. But with that, we're going to start with the sponsor of the bill, the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion. Minister, you have the floor. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here today to speak to Bill C-24. I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Tsawwassen and Musqueam First Nations. I am joined here today by officials, or will be joined, as the chair pointed out, from ESDC and Service Canada. Le projet de loi à l'étude apporterait des modifications importantes à la loi sur l'assurance.
The bill under review would make important changes to the Employment Insurance Act,
for a second.
Yep.
This is something that happens from time to time. We'll get it resolved and we'll restart the
My
clock.
apologies.
Yep.
Minister Qualtrough, can you resume your introduction? Your opening
Sure. En français? Le projet de loi à l'étude.
The bill under review would bring important changes to the Employment Insurance Act, the Canada Recovery Benefits Act, and the Customs Act. This would allow us to continue to support Canadians.
We laid out a plan to continue to support Canada's workforce through the ongoing pandemic. We transitioned from the CERB to a simplified employment insurance program and introduced a suite of recovery benefits to provide income support to workers whose employment continues to be impacted by COVID-19. At that time, we said we'd monitor labor market changes and make adjustments as needed. We've done that and are following through on our commitment to continue providing certainty for workers. The bill being proposed is to increase the maximum number of available weeks of EI regular benefits and make sure that Canadians don't face a gap in receiving the support they continue to need right now. If this bill does not get passed and receive royal assent before the end of March, tens of thousands of Canadians will be notified as early as March 26th that they have exhausted their EI regular benefits. So we need to get this done. In parallel to this bill, we are making increases through regulations to the number of weeks available under the Canada Recovery Benefit, the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit, the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefits, and to secure job protective leave under the Canada Labour Code. So let me now discuss the amendments to the EI Act in more detail. Bill C-24 amends the Employment Insurance Act to increase the number of weeks that workers can claim in EI regular benefits. Workers will now be eligible for up to a maximum of 50 weeks for claims established between September 27th, 2020 and September 25th, 2021. Cela permettra à des millions de Canadiens.
This will allow millions of Canadians to continue to receive support, all the while having access to essential resources and tools provided by employment insurance so that they are able to rejoin the workforce.
Claim, where workers can keep part of their EI benefits and all earnings from their job. The work sharing program allows companies to redistribute available work through a voluntary reduction in hours worked by all employees within one or more work units. It also allows employers to retain a full workforce on a reduced work week rather than laying off part of their workforce. This keeps workers on the job, which is key to Canada's successful economic recovery. Le marché du travail de notre
The labor force of our country is changing quickly because of the pandemic. This new reality leads to a need of training workers and increasing skills. This is another good reason why we should broaden access to employment insurance. Unemployed Canadians will have access to courses and training programs, all the while receiving EI benefits.
That Canadians want to work. Evidence from last year's labour market data clearly shows that when there is work available, Canadians take these jobs. I also want to highlight that as part of this legislation, self-employed workers participating in the EI program will also be able to temporarily access EI special benefits with an earnings threshold of $5,000 compared to the previously set threshold of $7,555. Self-employed workers have also been hard hit by the pandemic and need this extra support. Enfin, j'aimerais parler de la question des voyageurs.
I'd like to speak to the issue of returning travelers and the access to the recovery benefit. We've always clearly said that these benefits, and more specifically, the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit, was created to provide Canadians the opportunity to have a paid sick leave when it's not possible through their employer.
The Canada Recovery Benefits Act and the Customs Act that are proposed in Bill C-24 would make Canadians who travel for non-essential reasons ineligible for recovery benefits. However, Canadians who travel internationally for medical treatment that is considered by a medical practitioner to be necessary or to accompany such a person as an attendant will remain eligible for recovery benefits, as will Canadians who travel internationally for essential reasons and must self-isolate upon their return to Canada.
The applications of these eligibility regulations will be retroactive to October the 2nd, 2020. This corresponds to the creation of recovery benefits after Royal Assent of the Canada Recovery Benefits Act. As I said earlier, we are still in a period of crisis. We will continue to assess the workforce and the labor force and be there to support workers during this difficult time.
Importance of passing this legislation in a timely manner. The bill has been in the hands of all members since February 23rd. All parties have said that this bill is straightforward and necessary, and I urge all parties to move this bill along as quickly as possible. Let's listen to workers that are relying on EI to pay their bills and support their families. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We're now going to proceed with rounds of questions, beginning with the Conservatives. Ms. Doncho, please, for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, if you'll allow me before you start my time, could the Minister confirm that her officials are with us now? I just have a few technical questions to start.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Can you please confirm that?
We are still working to get all the officials online right now.
Are any of them available to answer technical questions now?
Currently, we have Mr. Andrew Brown.
Oh, okay. Is Mr. Brown able to answer technical questions about the legislation?
Yeah, yes. Hello, this is Mr. Brown.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to start my time now, all right? Okay, Minister, thank you for being with us today, and thank you to Mr. Brown for being with us as well. I have, a technical question to start. It's concerning Clause 2 of the bill. So my understanding, this is the self-employed clause. Essentially, it acknowledges that self-employed workers their income was negatively impacted in 2020. So it lowers their threshold, their qualifying income threshold from $7,555 to $5,000. However, it does so only until September 25th, 2021. That is, the EI Special Benefit Program will continue, of course, after September 25th. It's an existing benefit, but only for those that made $7,555. So can you explain why that is? Why not just carry that clause 2 up until the end of the year?
Great, and thanks for that question, Ms. Dancho. And so the logic for that date is that it aligns to when the other temporary measures with respect to the EI program would be in place, including the proposed extension of the number of weeks of regular benefits. So new claimants after that date would still have to meet the threshold of $7,555, but anyone who made a claim, self-employed participant, who made a claim before that date, their claim would be established and would continue. So they would not see their claims cut off on that date.
Oh, okay. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Dancho. The bells are ringing in the House, so we are obligated to suspend the meeting unless we have unanimous consent to continue. And so I would ask if unanimous consent exists to continue until there's 10 minutes before the vote, which will allow us time to pull away. And if not, we'll have to suspend right away. Do we have unanimous consent to continue until 10 minutes before the vote? We do. Please go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to start at 1:32. So I'm going to start from there. All right. So just confirming again, so anyone who is sort of qualifying for that benefit now won't automatically get kicked off on September 25th because they only made 5,000 or less, not 7,500 plus or less. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Brown?
That's correct. If they qualify before that date, they will continue to be eligible to be paid those benefits. It's just new applicants
after the 25th. Okay. All right, I understand it's sort of neat and tidy altogether, but I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm glad to hear that. But I still feel it's a bit of an arbitrary distinction. But I appreciate your explanation. Can you tell me how many travelers, leisure travelers, or just travelers in general, actually just claimed the CRB before January 11th? How many travelers?
The total, so we know that the total number of claimants at that point would have been something like 1.5 million Canadians. In terms of the number of travelers, we don't have information on the number of people who traveled and applied for the benefit prior to January, essentially. At that time, we were not asking people to provide information with respect to whether they had traveled outside of the country.
Okay, so you're not sure. And I know I asked the minister this during our bill briefing, and she had mentioned that it sort of has to go through CRA, and there's this whole process to talk to customs and the border service agents and the like to sort of work that out. Do you estimate how long, sort of, it sounds almost like an audit process. Do you estimate how long that's going to take to sort of root out who's been traveling for leisure purposes after January 11th?
So certainly, so the after January 11th is it's now part of the application process.
Oh, okay.
And so people actually have to indicate that when they apply for the benefit. So we have that information, whether they've indicated that they were traveling or not.
Okay.
It would be prior to January 11th when that was not part of the form that we would need to go.
Been made.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brown. The next one, Minister Qualtrough, I'm not just going to leave you out, so this one's for you. Thank you for being here today, Minister Qualtrough. I want to just touch on this issue. I know it's a very sort of touchy subject. Over the last week, we've been sort of back and forth like a ping pong saying who's to blame for any delays. But can you explain to me again, like the first bill debate day, the first day that we actually talked about this in the House of Commons was Monday. So I'm sure you can understand that this is sort of progressing at lightning speed, which, of course, legislation has been for over a year now. I think it was understandable at the beginning. I'm a little bit more hesitant to say that that's an excuse we can use now a year in. But so can you provide a little bit of more understanding for committee members of why we didn't get this bill in January, for example?
Thank you, and happy to elaborate. So, as you said, one of the kind of realities of the situation is that we are constantly monitoring the labor market. And so we were watching the unemployment rate go up in January, watching labor market participation go down in January, watching the second wave of coronavirus hit the country, but also result in sporadic regional shutdowns, particularly in Eastern Canada in particular. Mm-hmm. And so we gave parties the bill kind of, I think it was around February 23rd. We put it on the notice paper on February 25th, knowing that it was only 11 clauses and a very straightforward and surgical bill, aimed at addressing three very particular things. We figured that working together as we had in the past, we'd be able to get this through the House quickly, understanding that half of the bill we'd already got agreement from other parties to move forward with, the international travelers piece.
My only concern is, I have a few concerns, but when we spoke to the Canadian Labour Congress, who is a witness here earlier this week, they mentioned that they spoke to you about their concerns that the 26 weeks would not be substantive enough in early January. And I know in Manitoba, we were in lockdowns again, very strict ones mid-November, and I know a number of other provinces were entering them at the same time. So I just don't feel that, we knew this was coming, sort of, I felt like. So I feel like all of the blame is being put on the opposition Conservatives, but really I do feel that this bill should have been brought forward much sooner. And I'm just a little bit disappointed that it was not, but you're saying you went as fast as you could, so I appreciate that. But Mr. Vaughan yesterday in committee sort of said, or the other day in committee said that sort of because of the process, has to go to Treasury Board, Finance, and ultimately to Cabinet. So did that process take quite a long time on your end? Is it sort of the bureaucracy of the Liberal sort of government machine that perhaps held this up?
No, quite frankly not. In fact, the nice thing about how
wrong in that regard?
Well, no, I would like to explain kind of the process side. The piece that was more difficult to navigate, and officials can elaborate, was the EI side. So because we had built in the ability to add additional weeks to recovery benefits through regulation, anticipating that we very well may have to, that process is very efficient. And so we knew that we had a certain amount of time before benefits run out to be able to assess, real-time labor market conditions. On the EI side, because, of course, employment insurance law isn't meant to address a pandemic, we've lived that for the past year, we had to make changes to the legislation itself. So that was the part that we had to, and as Andrew said, it's not simply a matter of just it's a very complicated process that they can do better justice on the complication than I. But it was the EI amendments that are before you today that we wanted to make sure that we only had to go and open up this law once, how many exact weeks of extension we would afford to make sure it was equitable with recovery benefits, but to make sure that we weren't constantly having to go back to Parliament to open up this law and add weeks.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Ms. Dancho. Next, we're going to go to Ms. Young, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister Qualtrough, for joining us today. It sometimes is easy to forget that we are here in service to Canadians who are directly impacted by the decisions we make. And since Bill C-24 was introduced, I've heard almost daily from my constituents in London West concerned about their EI benefits running out and asking if the targeted changes in this bill were already in effect so that they could breathe a little bit easier. And on Tuesday, we heard from Labour leaders about how important it was that this legislation be passed. I wonder if we get your thoughts on the importance of getting this bill through the House this week.
Well, thank you. Actually, the importance cannot be understated. We face a reality where 1.7 million Canadians who access recovery benefits will have a seamless and no disruption in their benefits in order for them to be extended, whereas EI recipients don't have that certainty. Canadians will start exhausting their benefits the week of the 21st, and the week before that, but they'll be looking to apply for benefits on March 26th, I believe, and officials can clarify, but March 21st allows us time to make the system changes that we need to put in place in order for the system to be ready to receive those applications on March 26th. Can you confirm that, Andrew? Because I babbled a little there.
That's correct. The ability to make those changes to the EI system and in a seamless way would be looking to have a royal assent of those proposed changes to the legislation by that weekend. I guess it's the 19th, I believe, is the Friday the March 19th.
So, Minister Qualtrough, what would have been the impact for Canadians if we didn't get this legislation through this committee and until the House sits again? I guess that would be the week of March 21st.
Well, it would be really difficult for EI recipients because they would try to apply for another 2 weeks and that would be unsuccessful. They may, in fact, then call Service Canada, see what's going on, find out that their benefits had been exhausted. They may then turn and try to apply for the CRB, but of course they would be told that because they had an open EI claim, that wasn't possible, and it would create a real, chaos for Canadians, but also our back-end systems would really would really be messed up, I guess, is the layperson's way of putting it. I apologize. That it really isn't an option for Canadians. If we want to continue with EI, we need to make this change before.
How much time do I have, Chair?
You have 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to talk about how our EI system turned 80 years old last summer, and my understanding is that some of the programming language dates back to the 1960s, so it's not necessarily in sync with modern Canada. Last fall, we committed to modernizing the EI system, and in a letter to you, the EI Commission expressed hope that the government launch an independent commission soon to do more through the review. And we've made some changes over the last few months, but I'm sure with your experiences going through COVID, the pandemic, and C24 revealed some of the problems with the system. There's clearly more to be done.
Absolutely. So, to say that our existing system is clunky and complicated is probably an understatement. Successive governments have built and rebuilt and changed and modified different components, and it has been Herculean efforts on the part of officials to keep this system going and paying Canadians every 2 weeks through all of this. Listen, there's two tracks going on right now around EI. There's the immediate track to make the changes needed to kind of pivot during COVID. The law before you is one of those examples, to determine what comes immediately next. So as was explained on September 25th, all the temporary flexibilities within the system expire and the system goes back to the way it was pre-COVID. What in that batch of temporary changes should we keep as permanent, if any? Should we extend their temporariness? What does that look like? And then the broader conversation that this pandemic has afforded us to really dig in and modernize EI so that it works for all workers, because we clearly learned from this pandemic that it hadn't kept up with the way Canadians work.
So is the department looking at an independent commission to review the EI system?
We have been working with different stakeholder groups, including both the Employers Commissioner and the Workers Commissioner, Canada Labour Congress, other union groups. The plan is not to have a full-blown commission, but to do consultations to allow us the flexibility of moving quickly on the things that there is consensus on now, things that have been talked about and studied forever, that we can move on quicker, but not get those immediate advancements bogged down in more complicated, longer-term conversations that need to happen, for example, around a benefit for the self-employed.
But for now, our focus is on Bill C-24 and getting it passed as quickly as possible. Yes.
But I know that you are studying EI at HUMA, and I am happy to come back and have the broader systemic conversation with you all, because I think there's some really exciting opportunities.
We appreciate that.
Young.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Qualtrough. And yes, there's. I think we have a date for your appearance on.
Do you know? Excellent.
Yeah. Okay. Suite Madame Chabot et immédiatement après le tour de Madame Chabot, on va suspendre.
Mrs. Chabot, and immediately after her turn, we will suspend. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Minister, hello. Thank you for your participation. And thank you to your officials. I think we can all agree that during the past year, you yourself were not unemployed at all. This was a very difficult pandemic, and it was necessary to respond to the needs of millions of workers, 9 million exactly, who were thrown out of work. I don't have any technical questions on the Act. The Act seeks to do two things: to extend employment insurance benefits up until September 25th, and to correct this issue with regards to Canada Recovery Sickness benefits around non-essential travel. And we must act. But this is my question. Since the beginning, what we deplore is not that there's been a lack of action, it's that there's been no thought process around what could have been foreseen. This was my concern with C4, and it's still my concern today. You're saying that you're following the evolution of the workplace, that you're trying to adjust, but for a year now, one thing has been sure. Now we look at September 25th, 2021, and then what will happen? We know that it won't be possible to have the status quo, which is the current EI system, and it cannot respond to crisis situations, and it does not respond to unemployment, regular unemployment. So how do you expect to manage this in the months to come? How are we going to make sure that on September 25th, 2021, we will have a permanent solution to put in place? Thank you for this question. This concerns me as well. Honestly, we need to have a system in place on September 25th that works for all workers, because the economic crisis won't end. And we know that there's a third wave, and we don't know the details. We don't know what will be the level of unemployment, but we do know that we will be in a difficult economic situation here in Canada. We will continue. We want to be there for workers. We want to invest in training, in upgrading of workers. What we do know is that some flexibilities that we have implemented in the employment insurance system, a lot of partners, a lot of labor unions have reacted well to these changes. They don't want us to go back to the previous system we had pre-pandemic. So we're working very closely with employers, with workers, in order to determine, if we look at all the temporary flexibilities, which ones will stay and might be made permanent. And of course, this will depend on many other elements, but we do want to have a better system before September 2021. And this will be the legacy of the pandemic for workers, we hope.
Anything to add?
Si je peux juste ajouter une chose, ministre, c'est que...
Yes, I would have one thing to add, Minister. There's a political aspiration for changes of policy, but there's the limits of the current system. So the system, as was mentioned by MP Young, the system is 49 years old this year. So I want to indicate that some of the major changes, well, we're talking about a year and a half that it took to make these changes. So this is one of the limits that we have. The system is not extremely flexible. It's not easy to make permanent changes quickly, even if we had started today for September. And that is why different temporary measures were put into place, and we tried to seek to see what is possible within the system. So this is one thing that this committee is looking at, the future of EI, and to consider that making changes, we making technical changes, we can't put at risk the system. Also, we have to try to do this in a safe way. We can't hinder the system.
That it will be not only a matter of what we do, but the sequencing of what we do will matter in terms of how we impact the systems.
Yes, but I understand that there are some technicalities involved, but what concerns me the most is that the status quo of the current regime, as we know it, if this is what has to be taking up, going back into place on September 25th, less than 40% of women are eligible then. If we think of immigrants and other categories, if we look at sick benefits, they don't respond to the needs. And so, thank you. I'm sorry. We are now at the 10-minute mark, and we are going to suspend for the vote.
We'll get another turn. There are 10 minutes before we vote. We stand suspended. Madam Minister and to your officials, please ensure that you're back after the vote, and the same for you, colleagues. Once we vote, let's get back and we'll be able to continue at that time. So the committee stands suspended. And I also want to indicate that we have now been joined by Cliff Groen, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Benefits and Integrated Services Branch with Service Canada, Alicia Ram, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Skills and Employment Branch, Andrew Brown, who was with us before we suspended and is back. He's the Assistant Deputy Minister, Policy, Dispute Resolution, International Affairs, and Michael McPhee, Director General, Employment Insurance, Benefits Processing, Benefits and Integrated Services Branch, Service Canada, and also the witnesses that were with us and introduced prior to the suspension are back, and we're in session and we're ready to resume with questions, beginning with Mr. Blakey, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Madam Minister, you said the other day in the House debate that this bill was meant to address some urgent and simple needs in respect of the employment insurance system. I'm wondering if you can explain to people who are suffering from long COVID, cancer, and other kinds of conditions who have run out of their EI sickness benefit, why their situation isn't urgent in the opinion of you and your government.
Well, I think that's an unfair characteristic of our compassion for people who are sick or injured and ill. Listen, as I've said, this particular piece of legislation is very straightforward, time-limited, surgical, as I've described it, related to COVID to extend EI regular benefits and to address international non-essential travelers' eligibility. There are very important conversations to be had around EI sickness benefits, which will be had in the context of the broader EI modernization conversation. Sick leave has been a core public health measure for us since the beginning. You could get CERB if you were ill or self-isolating or quarantined from COVID. We created a specific sickness benefit, recovery sickness benefit, which we are doubling the weeks. So people who have COVID can access up to 4 weeks now of sickness benefits. The first thing we did actually in COVID was waive the 1 week period in the EI sickness and say that you don't need a note to claim these benefits. They're not mutually exclusive.
I mean, people's 15 weeks of sickness benefit have run out now. In some cases, they're still sick because there's been delays in their treatment as a result of the effects of the pandemic, even though they're not necessarily sick with COVID. In other cases, people are getting sick with what's becoming known as long COVID, something that in other countries there's been some more action on. It's not something we've actually seen a lot of targeted action on here in Canada to the extent that we've seen in other places. And because their condition is new, they're falling through the cracks. They're falling through the cracks in respect to government support, and they're also falling through the cracks in respect of private insurers who aren't recognizing the condition, and they've run out of financial support. So it is urgent. It is related to the pandemic, and yet it's not happening. The other criterion that you mentioned in the House the other day was that you wanted to, and you just mentioned it again, have surgical, simple legislative reforms. To change the sickness benefit from 15 to 50 weeks, all you have to do is change a 2-digit number in the Act. Could you provide an example of a more simple legislative change?
A legislative change, with all due respect, has to be deliverable. And one of the things I've tried to explain as best I could is how precarious our EI systems are. And so moving forward with the one commitment to change the number of weeks for EI regular benefits means that we can guarantee its delivery without compromising our systems. So we have to do these changes successively, not at the same time, and giving us the time to work towards a more broader modernization where we understand exactly where sickness benefits fit in, and we've committed to increasing the weeks of sickness benefits, feels like the more prudent course of action, so we don't in any way jeopardize, biweekly the payment of regular benefits to. And I'm happy to have someone explain the technical side of it. That's the best I can do.
With all due respect, Minister, it's been over a year since the House of Commons passed a motion calling for an extension of the EI sickness benefits. Your government committed to an extension of the EI sickness benefits in the last election. I mean, how much more time do you need? It's starting to have a serious impact on people in the pandemic context who have experienced delays in medical treatment as a result of the pandemic, who are suffering from new a new condition as a result of the pandemic. So how much more time do you need, going back to when the House of Commons first passed this motion before the pandemic struck, and has since had a unanimous consent motion? I take it you weren't in the House that day when the House unanimously called on the government to extend the sickness benefit to 50 weeks. How much more time do you need?
I can't give you a number of weeks or months that it will take to make this particular thing, but it will be part of the broader comprehensive changes we make to the system. We are not in a position to do this right now, but that doesn't mean we won't do it. And we are committed as ever to doing it.
How much correspondence have you received in opposition to extending the EI sickness benefit? And would you be willing to anonymize those letters and share them with the committee? Because I haven't received any correspondence as an MP. Anyone. We've got a unanimous decision of the House of Commons. There have been petitions on this going back years. In fact, one of the largest petitions in Canadian history is on the EI sickness benefit. I'm wondering where is the opposition coming from to extending the EI sickness benefit? In whose interest are you acting when you rag the puck on this and fail to get it done?
As I said, Mr. Blake, we are committed to doing this. This will be done. It has to be part of the broader conversation around EI. We are not in a position to do it right now, which doesn't mean we're not doing it. And we have to focus on the bill before us today, which does two things. And we need it to do those two things so that EI recipients of regular benefits don't see any disruptions in their benefit in the coming weeks. That's my priority, and that's what I'm focused on with this piece of law.
Well, with all due respect, Minister, I wish you would give the same consideration to people whose EI sickness benefits have already run out and are in the very position that you're saying we need to, and I agree with you, we need to avoid having people whose regular benefits are going to run out at the end of the month find themselves in a position where they don't have financial support. But we already know of people whose EI sickness benefit have run out because it's only 15 weeks. They're in that position already, and yet you don't seem to feel that it's a priority to respond to that very real need. And I can't for the life of me figure out the difference between somebody who's on EI regular benefits and can't get back to work and needs financial support, and somebody who's really sick and whose benefits have run out and can't support themselves financially. And it seems to me that this change meets all of your criteria, and we are good to go. And I'm going to be presenting an amendment to that effect later, I'm hoping, with the cooperation of members who have already voted for this extension in the House, that we'll be able to get it in the legislation, and that you'll provide the royal recommendation it needs to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Next, we're going to go to Ms. Doncho, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I actually have a similar question to what our Bloc colleague asked you previously. Is the sunset date for these benefits in Bill C-24 is, as you know, September 25th, 2021, about 7 months away. In response, it seemed to me that you mentioned that there's going to be a new EI system, that's sort of the answer, that these programs won't get cut off, but there's going to be a new sort of more inclusive EI system. Is that correct, my understanding of your response?
Well, there won't be a brand new different EI system at the end of September, so I apologize if that's the impression I get. What I'm trying to explain is that we need to make decisions about what the EI system will look like at the end of September. Absent that, it will revert to what the EI system looked like before the pandemic. So we are right now looking at the flexibilities and changes that we put in order to determine which ones will remain or which ones will be made permanent or which ones might be modified again, but there's just a couple of waves of conversation about the EI system that are happening at the time, was what I was trying to convey.
Right, so there'll be some sort of amended system to sort of, is it going to be sort of like a transition? My concern is that September 25th will be here before we know it, and as I've mentioned in the House and on several occasions, I don't feel that we've received quite any sort of strategic or coherent plan of how we're going to get all of these jobs that have been lost. I think almost 1 million or just over 800,000 jobs have been sort of permanently gone, and the CFIB estimates there may be 3 million jobs eliminated because up to 220,000 small businesses will tragically close or could close because of the pandemic. So I guess my concern is that you're saying we might amend the EI system a little bit to make up for any differences that we need, but I'm not quite confident in that answer that there's going to be a plan to sort of roll off folks from the CERB or CRB and the new EI extension onto this sort of new haphazard sounding EI system. So I'm just a bit concerned about that.
I apologize. I don't mean to sound haphazard. In fact, there have been dates throughout this pandemic where our legislative authorities or temporary measures have expired. We had one last September. We have one this coming September. We have one in June around some of the other business measures. And so looking to that date as the date at which these temporary measures end, in my case, for EI, we're already turning our minds to what comes next for the exact reason that you mentioned, so that workers don't see any kind of cliff or disruption of benefits.
Right.
But it is premature now because I don't know what the economy or what the labor market will look like, just like the conversation we had the previous round, for me to be able to even speculate what those changes might look like or where the economy is going to be in July or August.
Yeah. I hope that the goal is ultimately to get people back to work and to do whatever you can at the federal level to ensure.
A point of order. Is it my audio or is it the system audio that's reduced both conversations into a very faint echo?
I think it's yours. I'm hearing them fine.
Okay. And we hear you fine.
Okay. I apologize. I'll try to see if there's a resolution.
Chair, I was paused at 3:09, so I'm going to continue from there. All right. So, Minister, I think ultimately we do need a plan to sort of get people back to work in some fashion. So I'm really hoping your government unveils in the budget or something, some sort of strategic plan to sort of unleash the 20 million powerful workforce we have in Canada and really bring back jobs and facilitate that and sort of have government get out of the way so we can get those jobs back. I don't think any party would like to see people permanently on EI because there are no job opportunities, right? Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. That helps confidence levels, I think, to hear that you also don't want, up to 1 million Canadians on EI forever. Some of my concerns with the ability to sort of get a new, and haphazard may not be the word, but a new EI system and ready for September is the CERB EI issue. And I know I talked to you about it during the bill briefing, and I've asked several questions about this, is the folks that can't get on the CRB because they have an open EI claim. Now, the CRA official who came here mentioned there was this phone number at ESCC they could call, and then I know your officials, which I appreciate, confirm that there isn't one, but there is a task force you're working on. And there is a number, as you know, heartbreaking stories of sort of single moms and parents with newborn babies that are really stuck because they can't get on the CRB because they're stuck in the EI system. So do you have anything new to add to that? I mean, the CRA guy mentioned it's only a couple thousand people out of the millions who've been successful, but still that's a couple thousand Canadians that are not able to get any of these supports.
Absolutely. So as you've rightfully said, the challenge here is wanting to make sure that we don't have somebody on two different benefits at the same time. And even if someone has exhausted EI benefits, they remain with an open claim for quite a significant amount of time, which then prohibits them from accessing recovery benefits because the system flags them as having an open EI claim, even though they've exhausted their benefits. I think I would guess it would be Cliff or Alicia who could give us the best update on this, but I'll let one of you gentlemen help here.
Sure. Thanks, Minister. Cliff Garone here. Certainly, we are aware of that situation, and we are, as the member indicated, we are working closely with CRA. We have implemented a new approach in which those types of cases, because we do need to ensure people do not receive both benefits at the same time. So there's an ongoing data match with us and CRA. And we have implemented an escalation process in which when CRA is contacted by a client where there is their inability to be able to apply for the benefit, there's a escalation process between our two organizations to be able to quickly dig into that particular issue, confirm whether or not they do, in fact, if they are no longer entitled to EI, and then be able to quickly on the CRA side be able to release that so the person can proceed. If you are aware of any specific clients who have that issue, by all means, we'd be glad to look into it.
Okay, Chair, I know we're over time. I'll just say we'll connect with you, Mr. Garone, and the Minister's office on that because we have several. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Housefather, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was really impressed by Ms. Dancho's ability to know exactly where she was in terms of time. Very impressive. Minister, it's great to have you here, and officials, thank you so much for testifying today. Minister, you talked about the importance of getting this legislation through committee and through the House this week. Can you tell us how many people's benefits would be disrupted if we were not able to do that?
I sure can. Let me just grab it so I get it correct. So immediately at the end of March, it will be tens of thousands. And again, Alicia and Cliff can give the precise numbers. But the number I can give you is 676,000 people are expected to benefit from these additional weeks of benefits. So Cliff or Alicia, can you give the reverse number for me? Because mine's the positive number. How many people will start going off benefits and in kind of how the waves that this will happen?
Sure, Minister. So as of the beginning of April, it'd be over 40,000 individuals who would lose their benefits. By the beginning of May, it would be more than 200,000. And then by the end of June, it would be 600,000 Canadians.
So that's a substantial number of people that would be directly impacted if we didn't do this. Minister, you talked about a surgical bill, and I think everyone in the committee from all parties is sympathetic to the idea of extending sickness benefits. We all care about people who are sick and on EI and run out of benefits. But you've obviously made a determination due to technical reasons that combining these two actions in this one bill would be problematic. Could you or the officials explain what technical issues prevent both changes from being made at the same time?
Thank you for the question. I will defer to officials for the technical. I think I did the best I could, but go ahead.
Let me start, and then I'll throw it to Cliff. So just to give members a sense, we've been working since December, anticipating that the committee may decide to extend the number of weeks of benefits. And it will take, given the nature of this cobalt-based system we have, that full 4 months for us to be able to implement an extension in the number of weeks. For something like the sickness benefit that Minister Blakey mentioned, to extend the maximum number of weeks is actually a major system change, not like the one we're doing right now, because it changes the fundamental system logic. A change like that is a minimum of 9 months to do. And the challenge is with the cobalt-based system, simultaneously processing major changes massively increases the risk that we cause irreparable damage to the system. So part of the issue is going to be, were Parliament to make a decision around a particular change, that would preclude us from being able to do other changes. So for example, if there was a decision to extend the sickness benefit beyond the current maximum number of weeks, that would preclude us from being able to do other changes to the system for September. So it's a function of the limitations of the system that's code is almost as old as me.
Donc, si je comprends bien, Monsieur Flack et Madame la Ministre, qu'est-ce que vous êtes en train?
So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that if we decide today to try to do more than what was asked in C24, perhaps this would cause problems for the people that will lose their benefit the week following, and even worse. And so the reason why this change is not being done is because there's no confidence that two things can be done at the same time, and this could create a prejudice for a great number of people. Am I correct? I can say that we've already done the groundwork necessary to add the number of weeks, and this is the bill that you have before you. We've done this since December, and by March 19th, this could be implemented. But for any other change, anything over and above that, we have to make choices between what we want to do for changes in September and other elements or other changes that the members would like. It's not possible to just create a grocery list and to think that we can implement everything at the same time. There are limits to our system. It's an older system, and I know that you're discussing the future of employment insurance. And so it would be interesting to have people able to explain these limits, so then you would be able to make choices for the future that you want on a policy level, but also what can be implemented and with what timeline. Thank you.
De Madame Chabot.
Mrs. Chabot, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Minister. We're very aware, and we're very aware of the urgent need to act. As an MP, you know, I said this in the House, we will provide support to this bill. However, I think that you will have understood, because of our questions and my questions and that of others, that our concern is predictability. The pandemic will last a long time. When you say that you have to look at the labor market, we can already know, Madam Minister, that in September it won't be a total economic recovery. There will still be sectors of the market that are going to be hurting, and that the recovery will be slow. So we can already see this, and we can already predict with C4 what is acting on a piecemeal basis with temporary measures. So we're not contesting this at all, but we really have to say, for our regular regime and for the sickness benefits, we need something permanent and predictable, something stable. Yes, I completely agree with the urgent nature of these immediate changes and the temporary measures, but also the urgent nature to arrive at a modern system, to have a modern system. We have a system that cannot be changed easily without having technical issues. In my experience, when we went through the CERB, we didn't know what was heading in the future with COVID. And so we made decisions over a month, 2 months. We made decisions one after the other. And with recovery benefits, I wanted to give a longer runway for Canadians, 1 year. So we implemented the bill last September to have 1 year, 1 year of predictability.
We built in, and we all agreed about the necessity to build in additional weeks. We then had to make sure there was equity within the EI system. So we had to make sure nobody got less than 26 weeks, because that's what somebody on the recovery benefit was going to get. We had to make sure nobody on EI got less than $500, because that's what somebody on the recovery benefit was going to get. Now that we've decided people need more support, more weeks, we need to make sure there's equity between these two systems, in particular given that Canadians pay into the system of EI and not into the recovery benefit system. So for me, this runway of a year was a lot easier to manage in terms of predictability and certainty for Canadians. We weren't telling them the week before this was going to change or this was coming up. And I think we've managed it well. I think Canadians were happy with when they found out that we intended to add benefits on. I don't feel like they didn't tell me they were rushed. They may have shared that with you all, but again, I appreciate your support, because we've got to get this through today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Merci, Madame Chabot. Mr. Blakey, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. And I'm going to tell you why I don't accept the answer on the EI sick benefit. And the fact of the matter is that these people's benefits have already run out. This is not a new issue. It's something that has been raised many times before. And the job search requirement in the CRB excluded sick Canadians who are having ongoing problems with a chronic condition, whether it's cancer or long COVID or something else. And that was something that the NDP raised with you, Minister, at the time, in terms of the effect of that job search requirement. So what I can't accept is that the Canadian government in this time of crisis would throw up its hands and say, well, the 15-week benefit for people who are chronically ill in one way or another during the pandemic has expired, and there's nothing we can do about it. And that's effectively the position we're in. And there are already people who are not getting the financial assistance they need. And I don't think it's acceptable for the government to quit on them, which is what's happening. They already can't pay their bills. So if the people on EI regular benefits deserve a solution by the end of the month, and they do, so too do the people whose EI sickness benefits, which were far less to begin with, deserve a similar solution. And I'm not hearing any solutions from you. I'm just hearing about why you can't move ahead, rather than what you propose to do for these people who already don't have income support. Now, when it comes to issues resolved in about the CERB, the other thing that I think is missing from this bill, if legislation is required, is anything to do with a low-income CERB repayment amnesty. And I'm wondering if your department, one of the issues that is across the country, but especially here in Manitoba, kids who are coming out of foster care during the pandemic, who were told in some cases by government authorities at various levels that they should apply for CERB instead of social assistance, which is what they might normally have done if they didn't have a job. Very difficult circumstances to find employment right now, to apply for CERB. And they did in good faith, thinking they were eligible. These are some of the people who are now being asked to repay CERB. Has your department quantified how much money you actually think you're going to get back from any of these people? And what is the number?
Well, I'll defer the quantum to officials for accuracy, but I can assure you that we remained as committed to not putting in the people in a position to repay when they don't have the money to pay. And that's why we have given people interest-free year to pay back and to pay any taxes they're owed. We've not gone and asked people to repay. What we're trying to do is getting as many people to meet the eligibility criteria, working with them, get their taxes filed, figure out how we can put them in the best position to not have to repay. But if they do have to repay, no one is required to do it at the time. We'll work with them to have very flexible payments. And I understand that will necessarily have to be low amounts. There won't be penalties. There won't be interest for anybody who erred in good faith. But I can.
That debt hanging over their head is not
Mr. Blaikie, your time is well past. You took 2 minutes to ask the question. The least you can do is let her answer it, even though we are out of time. Are you finished, Minister?
Yes, I didn't know if officials had a number of, but I think that's a CRA question. I apologize. I don't know if you guys have that number.
Yeah. If
Minister,
they don't,
the reason there isn't a number is because the way Parliament designed the benefit, it wasn't just looking at their 2019 tax income to determine eligibility. People could also use the first 3 months of the year, so it could be a calendar, any 12 consecutive months. So that's what's taking CRA time in terms of giving people the chance to explain whether they may have had additional income that would have put them over the income threshold. And they're working with them. And as you indicated, Minister, flexibility on the repayment side.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Flack. Thank you, Mr. Blaikie. Next, Ms. Falk, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank you, Minister, as well for coming to committee. I appreciate when ministers are willing to come and especially take questions from the opposition. I appreciate that. Something that I want to touch on quickly is just the exemptions. I noticed, in the bill, but also in your opening remarks, mentioned the exemptions when it comes to medical travel internationally, and people being able to access this benefit. So, and I totally understand that, because there are, like in Canada, there are some treatments that are not available for whatever reason. It could be bureaucracy or whatnot, that have not been approved yet, that people will go elsewhere. And I appreciate that the government has acknowledged that sometimes people travel with people as well. So that's appreciated. So I'm just wondering, in here, if someone travels for compassionate reasons, leaves the country for compassionate reasons, whether that is taking care of someone You know, somebody might have a parent or an ailing grandparent or child or whatnot, spouse even in another country. Maybe they could be attending a funeral. I think we have to be very careful not to assume that every other country is in the same status that we are, with restrictions and lockdowns and that type of thing, as we've seen with the UK. So I'm just wondering, are those people excluded from accessing these benefits if they've traveled internationally for compassionate reasons?
What we've done with this process, and thank you for the really important question, is lean on the CBSA, so the Canada Border Services, and the public health agencies' existing quarantine system. So there are lists of types of travel and types of worker upon re-entry into Canada that have to, depending on where you fit, you have to quarantine or not. The vast majority of Canadians have to quarantine. If you are required to quarantine under the Quarantine Act, then no, you will not be eligible for benefits for those 2 weeks. That would likely cover the examples you have given. The examples you give, not the ones at the beginning.
It's fair to say that it was intentional to leave people traveling for compassionate reasons out.
The intent was to use the quarantine system that existed and not create yet another system for Canadians and another set of lists and rules and quarantine and decision makers when the public had become used to this system, understands they have to quarantine. So yes, if you have to quarantine, if you're ordered to quarantine upon re-entry into Canada, you will not, unless you meet one of the exemptions you said at the beginning, be eligible for these benefits for 2 weeks.
Okay, for sure. Thank you, Minister. Chair, I'd like to pass the rest of my time to Ms. Dancho.
Ms. Dancho, please.
Mr. Chair, can you tell me how much time there is?
Just under 2 minutes.
Okay. Minister, if you'll just allow me to, I would really appreciate the opportunity, since I was expecting on subs and mains today, and what I'm going to ask you about is coming down the pipe in 2 weeks. So I just would really appreciate if you'd allow me to ask you about CELA and NELS. Would you grant me that?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So as you know, 3 million Canadians are provided accessible learning material from these national nonprofits, CELA and NELS, with to folks who have print and visual impairments like blindness, cerebral palsy, and the like. And I first learned about this program in my former job at the province, and found that CELA and NELS actually help provide these resources to rural communities, which have, as you know, have very limited resources, with their libraries being much, much smaller. So when they approached me that your government's planning to fund, phase out, this sort of very small amount of money, which is $4 million of their funding from you over the next 4 years, I was very, very concerned, and I'm getting a lot of MPs telling me that they're getting complaints from their constituents about this. So I just would ask that you really consider in the next 2 weeks ensuring that this funding does not get cut, and I would love for you to respond, and it'd be great if you would confirm that you would keep this funding, but yeah, could you let me know and the committee know if you're planning to cut this?
Thank you. Yeah, so the bottom line is we are not going to let these organizations flounder because of COVID. We have worked very hard as a government on accessible publishing, started 4 years ago with the Marrakesh Treaty. We put in place this working group with the publishing industry and NELS and CELA, and everybody was going to work together with the common goal of making publishing accessible by creating books accessible at birth. So we wouldn't need organizations to convert these books into accessible format. So we all agreed on a work plan, and CELA and NELS were at the table. And in the fall economic statement, we announced kind of the next 3 years in this transition. But it has become, and we've been working with these organizations. I can assure you, I'm meeting with them on Monday. We are not going to let people not have access to books. I wish they hadn't publicly raised quite such an alarm, and I have already apologized to them that they felt they had to do that. But they are not going to be. They're going to be fine. Their funding is going to be stable. COVID has changed so many of our timelines around these kinds of journeys that I'm totally on top of this, and we have conveyed that, and I'm meeting with them on Monday.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. And Minister, the last questioner is Mr. Vaughan, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And just to be clear, compassionate grounds is a grounds for exemption under the program. If CBSA and Border Security agrees, is that not right?
Yes, but then they wouldn't have been put into quarantine. So exactly. I guess what I'm saying is
compassionate ground, but there is compassionate grounds.
There are for sure, yes. So, but I guess what I was saying is for us, the system looks at who's been told they have to quarantine. If you've been told you have to quarantine, you're not eligible for those 2 weeks. Gotcha. But if you have been told you don't have to,
just wanted to establish.
Thank you for clarifying that. You're right.
Yep. Okay. And in terms of Ms. Dancho's comments regarding the paraphrasing of my words, I wish she was as precise with my words as she is with the time, and put them all in there. It is not just the issue of pulling funding through to make these programs work. There is also the laborious task of making sure the legislation is drafted to execute these plans, and that also takes time to get through the various approval bodies before you land it on the floor of Parliament. Is that not true?
Absolutely, and just building consensus among stakeholders and partners and employers, and understanding the impact on the 7-year funding cycle of EI, and understanding there's just a lot to this.
I know in opposition, if we go too fast, we didn't consult. If we go too slow, we've taken too long, but we have to land it perfectly and then hope that it gets better through the committee process. Speaking of the committee process, I realize that next to the chair, I'm the longest service member of Parliament, which makes me feel very strange because I think I just arrived, quite frankly. But in terms of this committee, I've been here for maternity benefit changes to EI, bereavement changes to EI, sickness changes to EI, seasonal work changes to EI, longer support period proposals to change EI, early, easier access and standardized access changes to EI, temporary workers being included in the EI program, as well as gig workers being accommodated in the EI. Those are all motions that have passed Parliament. But if I heard you correctly, and Mr. Flack, what I also heard about that is that if we did any one of those changes, we'd have to wait 9 months before we got to the next one on the list. And that a comprehensive overhaul is what's required, not a piece by piece, because that could take us 20 years. Is that roughly the challenge we're facing with the computer?
So not all the changes are the same. Some, as I indicated, like extending the number of weeks that we're doing now, is a 4-month change that we've been working on.
But you can't change the other ones until that one's done.
Some we can do simultaneously. If they don't, it's more complicated than that. There's some you can safely do together, but some of the major changes that have been proposed are 18 to 24 months with the current system. And the reason...
If we did all of, sorry, I only have so much time. If we did all of those together, would there not be an impact either on the rates that employers pay or the rates that employees pay, or the draw on the general revenues and the general budget? To accommodate all of those changes simultaneously, there is an economic impact that either generates government debt or government rates being increased because EI is a self-funded program.
Yes, a self-funded program. Yep.
And if we did that, the Conservatives would have the choice to either fund it through tax revenue or to fund it through the fees that employers and employees pay, the premiums they pay into the system, in order to protect the integrity of the whole system for everybody. We can't just make these changes and snap our fingers and hope there isn't an economic impact. There is a budget that has to be approached on this issue.
Absolutely. We have to understand the impact on premiums, both for employers and employees, and we have to understand kind of the consequences to the overall EI account, which has to replenish every 7 years legally under law. So absolutely there's the economic component of this. And then there's the strategic sequencing of all the different changes we may want to do, because there are some we could do and without impacting the system. Some we may want to sequence differently. So it's a bit of a Tetris game, I would say, one that we are working hard to kind of plow through, but it is not as easy. No.
Do you ever wish you were on the? Do you ever wish the captain in Star Trek and just could say "make it so," like the opposition seems to think you can? No. So, but the other question I have is this: is that we've seen when we do wholesale computer changes at the government, we either get Phoenix, like the Conservatives thought they could do, which is just go to a private vendor and have them rewire the computers, or you get the NDP's response, which is just to hire thousands of public servants to process these, computer be damned. We have to land the changes to EI at the same time we change the computer system. That's a large budget item that can't simply be done with a simple piece of, with a private member's motion. You need to attach a budget to the changes, and you need to effectively transition between the risk of Phoenix and the risk of sustaining a system that's run on COBOL. That's the challenge that we have to manage as we fix EI. That's what's taking so long, not a question of whether or not we can get it to Parliament sooner or later.
The most important investment we will make in EI will be in our systems. Absolutely, 100%.
And so, if you were to make the comprehensive changes, you need comprehensive funding.
That's
absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Thank you, Minister, for being with us and for sticking it out through the suspension and the vote. That concludes our rounds of questions. Minister, you're welcome to stay, but you're free to leave. We're going to move now to clause by clause to the officials that are here. I understand that you will be staying with us in case there are some questions that will be posed on the technical or policy side as we consider the bill line by line. So I thank you for that. And Minister, you've graciously agreed to come before us on SUPS, mains, and EI. So we know that we'll be seeing you again. And we look forward to it.
Mr. Chair, if I would just do a really quick, very positive point of order. I just want to thank the Minister. I just want to thank the Minister for staying throughout the votes and the 30 minutes. And we really, really do appreciate her giving us her time today. So thank you, Minister.
Thank you for that, Ms. Dancho. Thank you, Minister. All right, we are meeting to consider Bill C-24, an act to amend the Insurance Act, additional regular benefits, the Canada Recovery Benefits Act, a restriction on eligibility, and another act in response to COVID-19. I want to welcome the officials who are here to help us with policy questions. And I think the next order of business is to call Clause 1. So if I could ask you, please, colleagues, to use the raise hand function so we can keep a speaking order. And so we have Clause 1. Is there any discussion? Mr. Blakey.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe I gave notice of an amendment to Clause 1. So I'd like to proceed to move that amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. And yes, we have your amendment. Bill C-24 seeks to amend the Employment Insurance Act by increasing the number of weeks paid under Part 1 of that Act under certain circumstances. This amendment attempts to increase the number of weeks being paid to a claimant in the case of prescribed illness, injury, or quarantine from 15 to 50 weeks, and therefore allowing more people to have access to these payments than what is being offered in the Employment Insurance Act presently. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition, states at page 772, since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge on the public treasury or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the royal recommendation, close quote. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment as proposed requires a royal recommendation since it imposes a new charge on the public registry, and I therefore rule the amendment inadmissible. Mr. Blakey, you have your hand up. Did you have something else you want to say?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to challenge your ruling, and I'm happy to motivate that challenge if it's all right with you to proceed to that now.
So I understand that a challenge to the chair's ruling is not debatable, and I think I now hand it over to the clerk to see if the chair's ruling will be sustained. Madam Clerk, the floor is yours.
The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Mr. Housefather.
I vote yes.
Mr. Long.
Madam Clerk, I believe I'm replacing Mr. Long.
That is correct. Mr. Vaughan.
Yes.
Ms. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Kuzmirchak,
Yes.
Ms. Dancho,
No.
Ms. Falk,
No.
Mr. Tucker,
No.
Mr. Viss,
No.
Madame Chabot,
Yes. Oui.
Mr. Blakey,
No.
and Mr. Dong.
Yes.
6 yeas, 6 pour, 5 non, 5 noes.
Thank you, colleagues. Is there Mr. Blakey? Did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I'd
Go
just
ahead.
like to speak to the clause, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please do.
It's a clause that I frankly think would have been much better had the committee provided us the opportunity to consider the amendment that I was proposing for some of the reasons that we discussed earlier in the debate. Mais je dois dire que c'était un peu surprenant, un peu décevant.
I have to say that it was surprising and disappointing that it was not voted to broaden benefits for Quebecers who are ill during the pandemic. It would have been an opportunity to exert pressure on the government and to finally work on the commitment that is to increase the number of weeks for which Quebecers are eligible for EI benefits, especially if they're ill. And as I was saying, it's surprising and disappointing that we see that a decision made by the chair with regards to the prerogatives of the monarchy would have been voted by the Bloc Québécois because this is a minority situation and we need to exert pressure on the government. And I think that it's obvious that we do need to exert pressure because today we saw a government that doesn't seem hurried to make these changes. It's not the first time that changes are being made to a bill that manages employment insurance benefits in this parliament. And this is always something where the government decides to cause delays. And I think it's not because one votes that you don't see other solutions coming from the government for those who are ill and those who have already exhausted their 15 weeks of benefits. It's very important for us to find a solution. So it's possible that this amendment is not a perfect solution, but we need a solution, and we don't see the solution here. We haven't seen it for a long time. We are in the middle, we've been in a pandemic for a year, and there are people that are still ill and they don't have any financial support from the government because their 15 weeks have been exhausted. I think that we need to find a solution, and I would have liked to see a desire on behalf of all opposition parties today to be united, to press the government on this, and I think that it would have been an opportunity. It's a missed opportunity. Thank you.
Merci, Mr. Blakey. Madame Chabot.
Mrs. Chabot. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that there's no time limit, so I would like to thank my colleague from the NDP for his plea, and he's saying that it's really important to increase the recovery benefits in case of illness to 50 weeks. And yes, we are making representations in front of the government. We have been doing this since elected. Yes, this was passed as a majority, but not unanimous. But this is there was a motion that I tabled myself. We have done press conferences. We have met with people. We have forced a meeting with the government, with the Prime Minister, in order to meet Mr. Saint-Fasson and Marie-Hélène Dubé. Yes, I mean, you should have heard us in the House today, even. Members of my party, we deplored that the government did not act before. And I would say that it's still possible to act. The bill of my colleague, C-265, will be discussed in mid-April. I hope that everyone will be there to pass this bill. This will be a bill that will make permanent illness benefits. It will increase from 15 to 50 weeks, and this is part of the bill. We know that there are people that have illness. We know that there's long COVID, and this is why we've been asking for this since the beginning of our mandate. So thank you and today with your amendment, that's not it's not really an issue of the monarchy. I mean, we are before a bill that seeks to make it so that in a few weeks there won't be any gaps, and that the thousands of unemployed people in our ridings and the labor organizations in Quebec are there pushing, and they're saying, push. Some people won't have anything, and it's not ideal. It's not ideal to have this emergency session, but your amendment, we saw it because technically it wasn't complicated, but it just creates another debate. It stretches out a procedure, but for temporary measures, we would we really need to look at a permanent solution for a special sickness recovery benefits. And in a month, we'll be able to do so. And this is really urgent. Thank you.
Madame Chabot, Mr. Housefather, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. A very brief statement. First of all, a vote to support the decision of the chair is not a vote on the amendment. It was a vote on a procedural vote in order to respect a parliamentary tradition that was decided by to respect the chair's decision. We all agree that we have to find solutions for people who are receiving sickness benefits, and I would like to say very respectfully to my colleagues that Mrs. Chabot has been championing this since the beginning, and this is why we are now looking at employment insurance. And it's not true to say that she's not championing this up until now. We've always worked very respectfully, and I hope that this will continue. And this was a procedural vote. And Mr. Chair, I very much appreciate that you give us the opportunity to debate on an amendment that has already been deemed a non-receivable. Now, we should discuss the clause and not the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, vous avez raison.
You're right. Right now, we are debating. We're debating the clause. I know that the discussion went a little bit further than that, but that's fine. You have the right to take the floor. Mr. Blakey.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. And I would like to assure all the members of the committee that we're not looking to to block the passage of this bill. There's already an order that says this will be passed this evening in the House, and it will be passed in the House of Commons tomorrow. So there's not an issue of a delay. We already have an order from the House of Commons that says we're going to do our work here at the committee and perhaps with amendments, and then tomorrow at the end of the day it will be passed. So we don't even have the power to delay the passing of this bill. It's a done deal today with the unanimous consent at the House of Commons.
Madame Chabot, avez-vous une autre intervention?
Mrs. Chabot, do you have another statement? No. No, I just forgot to lower the raise hand function.
Oh, Chair, did you call on me? Oh, okay. Well, for some reason, I couldn't hear you. Je ne sais pas si je comprends.
I don't know if I understand Mrs. Chabot. It seems that she's... The opposition parties are supposed to work together sometimes. I don't really know why you can't work with the NDP on this. You have the same goal. I don't really understand why the Bloc each and every time is voting with the Liberals. I don't understand. We're supposed to be in the opposition party. I think that if we would have passed the amendment, it would have been better for everyone who was sick. And for us, it's a no-brainer. The Conservative Party, I don't understand what the Bloc is doing today. Mrs. Chabot. Well, today, the Bloc has a position at the House of Commons that is clear. We vote in the interest of what is good for Quebecers. This bill is not perfect because a lot of things could have been predicted. So I voted on a procedural motion, and well, sorry, but I think that it doesn't. You know my position. I can speak for 10 minutes on my position, and I can talk about the issue of the importance of sickness benefits for people who are suffering. And I would even say that this is a commitment, among many commitments of the government following the election. And in our mandate letters, it was a commitment in 2015 to review the EI regime. And now we were talking about a technicality that would be difficult to implement. Some things are not acceptable as an argument, but something that would not be acceptable, and this is my reading of a procedural issue, is that it would delay the adoption of a bill, and this would deprive millions of people, men and women, and even people who are sick, to have the right to have regular benefits, because there's a deadline, and this is what I deplored with C4. With C4, we had to adopt measures that replaced the CERB, not at the 11th hour, but the 11th hour plus one, because the delay, because the timeline had expired. And I don't want to be in this situation. This is why I'm talking about predictability. And I voted on a procedural motion. And now, in the heart of the issue, I'm for, and so I want the sickness benefits to go to 50 weeks, but here we're voting on a temporary measure till the month of September, and this has to receive royal assent as soon as possible. And my reading of this issue of receivability is that yes, this will lead to other delays if we had voted in this way. I think the Bloc Québécois votes for the best thing given the circumstances without any partisanship.
Perhaps Mr. Blakey can clarify, is there a deadline on this amendment?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Housefather, point of order.
The amendment has already been ruled non-receivable, and this chair's ruling on that has been sustained. There should not be any further discussion or debate about the amendment or clarifications on an amendment that's already been rejected.
We're So we're not going to let this go on much longer. I take your point. Ms. Dancho has posed a question. Mr. Blakey, if you want to answer it, then we're going to go to Mr. Vaughan.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's to amend the legislation, so it's not. I mean, there's no deadline on the change proposed in the amendment. There is a deadline on passage in the House, which is guaranteed by the order of the House passed today. That whatever we do here, the bill in some form is going to be passed by the end of the day tomorrow.
Mr. Vaughan. You're on mute there, Mr. Vaughan.
Apologies. I'm glad we've clarified that the Conservatives see their job in this committee as only ever opposing the government, and that's their job and that's their choice. And I appreciate that we have other parties in the House and other members of the House that are prepared to collaborate in the best interests of Canadians. That being said,
point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, please.
Point of order.
I perhaps I'll inform Mr. Vaughan. I guess he doesn't understand how our Westminster-style democracy works. But the job of the opposition is to oppose. I'm not sure if he's aware of that. He'll be in opposition one day, hopefully soon, and he'll understand. That is not a point of order. That is a point of debate. Thank you, Mr. Do we have another point of order?
No, I just asked the chair to get back to the clause by clause so we can review this legislation.
All right. I see no further hands raised, so I presume we are now ready for the question. And the question is, shall Clause 1 carry? Do we have consensus? Do we require a standing vote? I see consensus. Clause 1 is carried. We're now on to Clause 2. Any discussion on Clause 2? Seeing none, shall Clause 2 carry? Do we need to? Okay, I see consensus. Clause 2 is carried. We're on to Clause 3. Is there any discussion with respect to Clause 3? Seeing none, shall Clause 3 carry? I see consensus. Clause 3 is carried. Next, we have new Clause 3.1. Any discussion with respect to new Clause 3.1?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, is that the amendment that was proposed?
That's you. Yep.
Okay.
You have the floor, Mr. Blakey.
Is that similarly? I mean, I think the arguments for this amendment are effectively the same as the one we have been discussing previously. So, I mean, I don't think we need to revisit that discussion. I think we've had it and we've had a vote. And I don't think that in the absence of the original amendment, amending this particular clause would make sense. It would create a kind of dog's breakfast in the legislation. So I don't know if your ruling would be the same for this amendment or not, that it's out of order. If it is, it would not be my intention to challenge that ruling at this time, given that we've already considered that question on the previous clause.
Well, you've exactly anticipated what was next, Mr. Blakey. The amendment proposed is inadmissible for the precise reasons that were contained in my ruling in connection with your first amendment. So, that being the case, I take it that if you're moving the amendment, I'll issue the ruling. If you're withdrawing the amendment, we can move on.
I'll withdraw it for the sake of time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Okay, so then we are on to Clause 4, because that proposed amendment would have created a new clause and it has been withdrawn. So we're now at Clause 4. Is there any discussion with respect to Clause 4? Seeing none, shall Clause 4 carry? I see consensus. It's carried. Clause 5. Any discussion? Seeing none, shall clause 5 carry? It's carried. Clause 6. Any discussion? Seeing none, shall clause 6 carry? Clause 6 is carried. Clause 7, discussion. Seeing none, shall clause 7 carry? Carried. Clause 8, discussion. Seeing none, shall clause 8 carry? Carried. Clause 9, any discussion? Shall clause 9 carry?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Viss.
Yeah, I do just have a quick question, and I'm not opposing the clause, but I just noticed if the staff from ESDC could explain the attestation exceptions throughout the bill, and their applications made before January 11th, 2021. I just wanted some clarification on that. If they could provide that for me. I'm not opposing anything. I just need some clarification.
Sure. It's Andrew Brown speaking from ESDC, and I can answer that question for the member. The reason that there are these references to the attestation is that the provisions of the bill would come into force retroactively back until when the benefits were created. And so if the attestation were to have applied to those periods from October 2nd, when it received royal assent, up until January 11th, when the CRA started to collect that information from people applying for these benefits, then they would have made incomplete applications. In other words, those people who applied for the benefits back at that point would then become ineligible for the benefits, not having answered this additional question with respect to international travel. And so that's the reason that it indicates that for that one particular criteria, one each for the Canada Recovery Benefit, Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit, and Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit, that they do not have to have attested to that criterion, which comes into that would come into effect retroactively.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Brown.
Any further interventions, questions with respect to Clause 9? Seeing none, shall Clause 9 carry? It's carried. Clause 10, discussion, questions? Shall Clause 9 carry? It's carried. Sorry, that was Clause 10. Did I say 9? I think I did. Shall Clause 10 carry? Carried. Clause 11, discussion, questions? Seeing none, shall clause... Yes, go ahead, Mr. Viss. Clause 11.
Yes, on the Customs Act, can Mr. Brown just give us a quick explanation of the impacts of Clause 11 and how it relates to the Canada Recovery Benefits in conjunction with the Customs Act? Thank you. Just need a little more clarification on what it's actually doing.
Sure. Thanks again for the question. And so in this case, in Clause 11 and the change to the Customs Act, the purpose here is to provide an enabling authority so that the Canada Border Services Agency, which collects information when people enter, also exit the country, that they would be able to share certain information with the department simply and solely for the purpose of administering or enforcing the Canada Recovery Benefits Act. So this is really for that purpose of being able to confirm and check for compliance with the criteria that the person has not been traveling non-essential international travel. So again, the primary way in which this will be applied is that CRA will be asking applicants to attest to the fact that they meet the criteria, that they have not traveled internationally, but this would provide an enabling authority so that if there is a concern, it's possible to check, and it would provide the ability for CBSA to then share that information, which is collected under the Customs Act, with ESDC or CRA for the purpose of applying for these benefits.
And just one more quick point of clarification, Mr. Brown. What would lead to someone having a concern about someone not following this rule? How would a concern be raised?
So thanks again for that question. And I think there probably could be a number of different situations. One of them certainly is that the CRA has its own line that people can connect with for the purpose of providing information. So that's something that they routinely use in terms of leads for investigation, if you will. Otherwise, there could be some other, information that would lead to that sort of a check. Without this sort of enabling authority, there wouldn't be a way for CRA, when they're administering the act, to be able to get at that information. So this is an important enabling authority, so that when information comes to their attention, they've got a way to check that with CBSA, and subsequently they would need to follow up with the individual to further investigate that situation.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So now I can receive confirmation that it's not a real exchange of information between Canada Border Services Agency and the Canada Revenue Agency.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir.
Any further questions or discussion with respect to Clause 11? Seeing none, shall Clause 11 carry? Clause 11 is carried. Clause 12. Any questions, any discussion around Clause 12? Shall Clause 12 carry? It is carried. Shall the title carry? Carried. Shall the bill carry? Shall the bill carry? Carried. Shall the chair report the bill to the House? That's carried. Okay, colleagues.
Mr. Chair, you should tell everyone in the House about how well all the parties work together to get C-24 passed to help Canadians.
It would be my profound honor to do exactly that, Mr. Viss. Thank you.
I think you
Brad, did you forget that Andrew and Mr. Dancho just had exchange about parliamentary duties?
Mr. Chairman, what about the reprint of the bill? I think we still have one more vote.
It's not on my list, but
can you ask
Madam Clerk, do we need one more motion?
No, you don't, because the bill was not amended.
Aha. There we go. No need to reprint an unamended bill. I learned something new today. In fact, I learned a lot new today.
Unless you'd like to revisit the amendment, Anthony, I'm game for that.
Yeah, you can call me afterwards and we can chat about it all you want.
Madame Chabot, levez sa main.
Mrs. Chabot raised her hand. Yes, thank you. I think that the work of the committee and to return this bill tomorrow as soon as possible, I think that there are thousands of workers that will thank us for this. And to conclude, I would like to say that in the work of the opposition, in less than a month, I would ask you to pass Bill C 265, which will be tabled and debated. We're going to ask for a permanent change to the recovery benefits. It will be a wonderful opportunity for the opposition parties and for the government also to vote for.
Oh, please.
Oh, sorry. For some reason, I can't hear you, Chair. My apologies. You mentioned we could talk about committee business a little bit just quickly since our agenda changed today and we didn't have Minister Qualtrough come to talk about SUPs and mains, and I just wanted you to address that and let us know when that will be happening or how we're going to fix that to make sure she comes before we vote on that.
Sure, I think that's in order, Ms. Dancho. Thanks for raising it. Let's excuse the witnesses first. So to our colleagues from ESDC, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for your patience as we work through the interruptions. And thanks for the work that you've done on this bill and more generally in the pandemic. I really don't think we can say it enough. The outstanding work that's been done by the public service, right across the public service, but most especially within your department. And so we appreciate what you're doing for Canadians, and we appreciate what you're doing to help support us in our work. And we thank you for being with us. And as I like to say, you're welcome to stay, but you're free to leave. So thank you so much. Ms. Dancho raises a good point. Our subcommittee report has been sideswiped by the unanimous consent motion that resulted in the work that we did here today. But we have adopted that subcommittee report. We have mains and SUPs that we've committed to deal with. So I am going to suggest that we, as soon as possible, inquire of the ministers with respect to their availability and get them before the committee as soon as possible. It's entirely possible that the date for SUPs will pass us by, but it's unlikely that that will happen with respect to mains. But I think the spirit of the committee motions were that we want ministers before us to speak to the SUPs and mains, and so I would suggest that we extend an invitation. We bring them in at the first available opportunity. That would be my 2 cents on it, because I don't know the minister's schedules, but the floor is open for any further discussion on the topic of future business. Mr. Kuzmaricek.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to clarify, what would be the deadline for us to report on SUPs and mains?
I believe the mains is the end of May. SUPs, I believe, is the end of next week, depending on when allotted days are scheduled. It could even be sooner than that. Okay. So as I know that we have the Minister of Seniors committed for our next meeting, but the commitments from Ministers Hussen and Qualtrough have been wiped aside by the business of the House that we just dealt with. But yeah, so that's where we are on that.
Because Chair, I do believe that the 23rd or the 25th would be the target date, if I'm not mistaken, to have Minister Qualtrough appear. Is that correct on SUPs?
So I believe we have Minister. Yeah, I think you're right, Madam Clerk.
Currently, Minister Schultz has agreed to appear on the 23rd.
Right. And we were looking at, we had penciled in a consideration of the draft report on housing on the 25th.
That is correct.
Right. And those are the only 2 meetings that we have scheduled before the 2-week break at Easter. Yeah. Okay. So that's where we are. So no, as it stands now, I don't think we have a confirmed date with Minister Qualtrough. Am I right on that, Madam Clerk?
Not at this point in time, but we can reach out to Mr. Qualtrough.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. We have Mr. Vaughn and Ms. Doncho with their hands raised. I recognize Mr. Vaughn.
So I would suggest we have two meetings effectively. The 23rd, we will find out in short order which ministers, if they're available, will be available, and we have made a commitment to get that done. But if we don't get ministers, the EI study will I assume take up those spots. But we recognize the opposition's right to have the ministers appear on SUPs, and we'll do what we can to effectively recognize that. The 25th EARNS drafting date may also be affected by this, but I think that we have also made a solid commitment there. So what I would propose as the way forward, I hope, which I find acceptable, is that the chair get back to us based on the minister's response to the invitations which have been sent to the ministers requested by the opposition, that we in between now and the 23rd, update members as to what is likely to happen with the commitment to the EI study will move forward if we don't get ministers, although it seems like we will, and that we stick to the 25th EARN drafting instructions to get that work off our desks once and for all and move on to make sure we have a clear runway to finish the EI study and honor our commitment to Madame Chabot.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Ms. Doncho?
Just a question and a comment, Chair. My understanding is we could still have ministers come for SUPs even if we've had to pass it because of deadline constraints and committee constraints. Is that correct?
I think you're right. I think that's called a subject matter study or something of the sort. So they would deem to have been adopted, but it's still fair game to ask them questions about it. I think you're right.
Okay. I mean, I would prefer not, but if we, I understand we're under scheduling constraints, and I would also ask the chair just consider perhaps evening meetings. I know I've mentioned this before, but Conservatives always happy to add another meeting during break week or another one in the evening throughout the week. So I'd ask the chair to consider doing that because of the time constraints that we're under.
Yeah, the biggest challenge with that, of course, is the competition for available meeting rooms and resources within the House. But I thank you for indicating your willingness to put in the extra time, and where we can find it, we'll take advantage of it. Thank you. Mr. Vaughn.
Oh, that was it. I should have taken my hand down.
Is there any further business to come before the meeting? Very well. Do we have consensus to adjourn? I believe we do. Well done, everyone. Thank you very much for being able to get that through and get it reported back to the House. Have a good evening. We'll see you at the votes.
See you later.
Okay.
Good job, Chair.